I'm going to make a relatively short presentation on remote and robotic observatories, observing, and Roger is coming in with another summary in his own unique style, and then we will have plenty of time for question and answer. So on the, let me share my slides. Here we go. There we are. That's a nice easy one, isn't it? Anybody know where that observatory is? You can tell from the trees. That is Siding Spring in the north of New South Wales. But it's not remote and it's not robotic. It's just a nice picture. Okay, first of all, there is some terminology. As you can see, there is a difference between a robotic observatory and a remote observatory, although most remote observatories are indeed robotic, but not all robotic observatories are remote. I'll leave you to read that for one moment. I think it's pretty good, two pretty good definitions of the respective concepts, and you can see the important difference. Okay, so more generally, more interestingly perhaps to my listeners, is the fact that there is plenty of choice for using and possibly having to hire with DOSH remote robotic telescopes. There's a few, there's a lot more, and I'd like to cover just 3 of them as examples of ones with different characteristics, giving you different levels of sophistication and indeed capability. So the first one, close to home, is an organization called Telescopeorg, which somebody in the Open University must have very cannily collared as a name many years ago in order that their particular product could stand out from the crowd. What better than Telescopeorg? Being in a university, we of course have to extract some classwork from you before you're allowed to use this facility for free. So we have a course, a short course called Astronomy with an Online Telescope. You'll find it on our very well-known free course website called OpenLearn. So if you go to OpenLearn, you type in Astronomy with an Online Telescope, you will be presented with a short course which you are required to take. There's no exam or anything else, but we do say you should go through it if you're a relative beginner, that is. And halfway through, you are given instructions on how to use the open science observatories of the OU, and you can then proceed to order some images. No time series photometry here. This is the OU's 16-inch COAST telescope, and it will only be available to students on the OpenLearn course in a very limited way. You probably would have to focus in on Messier objects. There's an example of a picture taken by COAST. COAST, by the way, was funded, well funded several years ago in the usual fashion. If you can think up a 5-letter acronym, which isn't taking things too far away from real words and sensible combinations of words, if you can get a 5-letter acronym out of a funding proposal, you'll almost certainly get it funded. And COAST stands for Completely Autonomous Service Telescope. How about that? That explains exactly what it does. But it'll only be relatively straightforward photographs. Here's one which is completely different. This one I have seen, and it came into my local astronomical society in a backpack and was immediately set up in a flat area, turned on, and being a smart telescope, it was able to recognize where it was pointing, and so it doesn't need polar star alignment. Amazing stuff. It does pattern recognition on stars that it sees in its field of view. It says, I'm pointing at this latitude and longitude, celestial latitude and longitude, right ascension. And then if you want to go to another object, it knows where to go. How about that? And it'll also, thanks to a huge database of moving target ephemerides, it can arrange to track, say, an asteroid or a comet without any manhandling and reconfiguration or indeed anything else. It has an Altaz mount. It's only got a 4.5-inch mirror, which at first sight led me to think that it wouldn't be much use for exoplanet transit observations. But as usual with these new products, I entirely underestimated it. And it is a part of a formal network called the Citizen Astronomer Network. And it is indeed involved in a pro-am collaboration with the SETI Institute. And they are supposedly doing interesting transit observations. I can imagine that there would be scope for simultaneous observations using several, even many of these 4.5-inch mirrors. And of course, also given the fact that the innovators of the EV scope by now have managed to seed every continent with a good number of these devices, it could be used for tracking very long duration transients by handing over from one group of unistellar devices to another group in a different continent. So it has some promise, although I have to warn you, it's a fairly expensive Christmas gift. And here's one more. Las Cumbres Observatory. So this is really getting quite serious, and Anastasia this morning told us about XOClock's association with Las Cumbres, and also the other one on her list, a name I've temporarily forgotten. I think it was, well, it's on my list actually, on the top there. What was it? It was Telescope Live, yeah. So Las Cumbres is a network of 25 telescopes at 7 sites worldwide. So they have a pretty good longitude coverage, I'm sure. And they go in for these very long duration transits and presumably other sorts of events, handing over from one telescope to another one at a different longitude. And this involves one of their specialities, which is very much to do with dynamic observation scheduling, making sure that optimum use is being made of all the telescopes that are in the dark, including telescopes that need to give way to maybe other observations because they have a handover from a previous telescope to the next one. It's uniform instrumentation across the network, which I can imagine would be quite popular with astronomers who don't want to be wasting time reading manuals and learning how to operate each instrument that they manage to get time on. It's a non-profit science institute, Las Cumbres, which means that in principle their hiring rates are rock bottom. And it is, as I said before, in a partnership with XOClock. So all I'm going to say here is that there are many, many opportunities. XOClock is forming an association with 2 of them. And I would suggest that you, since you're all probably going to be XOClock members, it would be very useful perhaps to keep your tabs on what we're going to be providing in XOClock as a list of possible observatories, possibly ones where XOClock is taking the lead as the negotiator or even the buyer of time, and others which could be hired or even used for free, like the Open University one, by individuals on their own bat. So there it is. Look, less than 15 minutes. How about that? Okay, Roger, any questions? There might be 1 or 2 questions right now. I'm not looking at my, I'm going to stop the share and we're going to have a look and see whether anybody has written anything interesting.
Can I ask
yes.
a question?
Well, actually, the ultimate question is about Twinkle, isn't it? The one I see on the bottom here. I'll come to you in a minute, Martin.
Yeah.
So just to let everybody know, University College London, the host of XOClock, is working on developing a satellite called Twinkle, which will also be capable of transit observations and, as I understand it, transmission spectroscopy. And it's going to be a radical departure from what you might think satellites of this class would be, launched by a space agency, not much change out of $500 million, and available to principal investigators, and a few months later, maybe non-principal investigators, but eventually becoming open source data. Twinkle essentially becomes the first step in what I think will become a developing mode of operation, and that is that Twinkle will essentially be space science as a service. For those of you in software development, you'll recognize software as a service. This is space science as a service, and universities around the world will be invited to rent time on Twinkle. And again, I'm sure it'll be essentially a non-profit making organization, initially funded by various sources of finance. I haven't come across them yet. Maybe even venture capital, and let's hope that it pays its way, because if you happen to be associated with a university that wants to either start doing exoplanet research or is continuing to do exoplanet research, and you happen to be a student or associated in some way, you might be able to get your hands on Twinkle time. End of speech.